Okay, welcome back to our series. Now, when you've made up your mind that you are getting into goat farming, before the goats even arrive, before you think about getting your goats, there are three fundamental pillars that you must make sure that you understand and have a good grasp of before you even get into buying any goats. Now, those three pillars, I consider them the three pillars because every other thing depends on those three pillars. And those three pillars are so important that if you have one of them not properly sorted, it has a way of messing up the other two legs of the tripod. So I call them the trinity of goat farming. And those three pillars include housing, feeding, and medication. I repeat, housing, feeding, and medication. If you want to get into goat farming or maybe sheep or cattle farming, you have to make sure that these three pillars are properly sorted out. Now, today we're going to start from housing. We're going to start looking at housing. What kind of housing system is ideal for a goat, and what kind of housing system is best for you depending on the region where you are. So when it comes to housing for regions such as where we are in the southwest, where there's high volume of rainfall and we always get wet seasons longer than dry spells, the ideal sort of housing for a goat farm is the elevated slated floor. The elevated slated floor is simply a housing system where the entire house of the goats is raised above the ground, and then the flooring is such that there are spaces and gaps that allow for urine and feces to pass through. So that's the basis of the elevated slated floor. Now, what we're going to be doing here is that I'm going to break down this elevated slated floor into two major parts. I'm going to talk about the roofing system of the slated floor, the flooring system of the slated floor, and then as a bonus, I'll look at the ventilation of the slated floor. So I'm going to be breaking it into these three parts so that you understand the essence and the essentials of this elevated slated floor. Then you can, tweak yours and customize it to your taste. Okay, so when it comes to the roofing system of the goat farm, even though it might appear as, what's there, why do I need to learn anything about the roofing system? It's important because you want to understand how to regulate heat within your goat pen. It's always important to understand how to regulate heat because these goats can actually suffer from heat stress. So the roofing system is really important to be able to understand how to regulate heat. Now, first things first, when you are building your goat pen, you want to make sure that the roofing system is slanted. You don't want to have a flat looking roof because you're simply going to be baking them in a house. So you want to make sure that even for the sake of drainage, when it rains, that you have a slanted roof. Now, you don't just want it to be slanted, but it is important for you to understand the nature of how air works. Now, when you have, in this kind of case now, where the roof is slanted, what you have is, whether it's slanted or not, in fact, what you have is during the peak of the afternoon, as the sun starts to heat up the roofing sheet, the air that is gathered close to the roofing sheet becomes very hot. And the way air works is, the property that air has is cold air is actually denser than hot air. So what happens is that as air starts to heat up, as the temperature of air starts to increase, the density becomes lighter, the air becomes lighter, so it tends to want to move towards the atmosphere. So let me not bore you with all of that. Basically, just know that hot air tends to want to move towards the atmosphere and cool air is closer to the ground. So what happens is, as the roofing sheet gets hot or heated up, the air around it starts to get very hot. And if that air does not have a means to escape, it starts to get layers and layers of hot air until eventually the entire housing is filled with hot air. So even though you are slanting the roof of the house, you have to make sure that at the highest point of the roof, there is a vent created for the air to be able to escape. So if you have the roofing system, in this case, you have that this point is the lowest point, and as it goes this way, this point is the highest point, right? So it is intentional that we have this sort of opening here, because this side being the highest point, if we had increased these coaches of blocks, just like as you can see all the way down there, if it was increased all the way to this point, then what you have is that you will not have a vent at the highest point of the roof to allow hot air to escape. As you can see, I'm standing really close to the roof and I'm not feeling that hot. The reason is because no matter how hot it gets, as that hot air starts to look for a way to travel into the atmosphere, there's a vent already existing that helps it to escape. So the mistake that most people do is that they roof their goat pens in such a way that it comes from the highest point to the lowest point, but then where they create the openings is at the lowest point, and at the point of the highest the highest point of the roof is usually completely sealed. So what you have is that hot air will just continue to build inside the pen But because of the nature of air, it always wants to go towards the highest point of the roof because it's trying to leave the housing. So you just have a very thick layer of a very hot pen, right? So you always make sure that whether you're slanting your goat's house backwards or you're slanting it forward, you have to make sure that the area where you have the ventilation, the area where you are leaving open, should be the highest point. So let's say this entire place was filled with these bricks and there was no vent. Then the sensible thing to do would have been to create the flooring to come from this point and have the peak at this point, so that that hot air will be able to escape through this vent. But because there's a vent on this side and there's a vent on this side, it didn't really matter where the roofing system was going to be slanted to. But if you have that the back, which is this side, was completely covered, then it's sensible to make sure that the highest point of your roofing is at the other side where you have your largest opening. So that's one of the things that you must consider when you are roofing your goat pen.